I noticed that there were some people from Russia which have decided to subscribe to my channel, so to them, Здравствуйте, товарищ. This is my part 8 of my equipment series of videos covering German self-propelled anti-aircraft guns and how they were organised. Because of the number of vehicles in this class, I divided this into two parts. This part is number 2 and contains the later war self-propelled anti-aircraft weapons or vehicles, and also the main produced ones. I created these videos in order to assist in my efforts to determine what equipment was used, when and in what formation. This is a specific issue when creating equipment data charts or organisational tables for the German Army in World War II. I must admit, in terms of creating army lists, you would rarely have more than 1 to 3 of these vehicles on a side. But nonetheless, it is interesting to determine just how many would normally be expected to be fielded based on the period, what type they were, and I just found it rather interesting to go and research this. We will now deal with the second half of the half-tracked variety of self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. Now, these weapons that I'll be covering in this video are the ones which were the most produced rather than converted. Now, of course, there is an exception, the SD-KFZ-7, which was actually manufactured from scratch and actually probably equipped most of the Panzer divisions at some point in time during the war. But ignoring that, most of the earlier weapons that I've dealt with in my previous videos were typically field conversions or manufactured in fairly low numbers. The 2 cm Flak 30 aus leichter Zugkraftwagen 1 ton, abbreviated as 2 cm Flak 30 aus LZGKW 1 ton, is a German self-propelled anti-aircraft half-track developed in the late 1930s. While most sources show only 185 were produced, some sources indicate 370 were produced in 1939, 1225 in 1940, for a total of 1596 for both the Heer and Luftwaffe. The leichte Zugkraftwagen 1 ton, armed with the 2 cm Flak 30, was produced in 1939 and 1940. Starting in 1941, production was replaced with the model fitted with the 2 cm Flak 38. From 1942, these vehicles were given sheet metal covers as protection from the weather and small arms fire. Flak 38s were mounted on the 1040 beginning in 1941, although the platform wasn't widened until much later. As the war progressed, the guns were more often fitted with gun shields, particularly if they were also fitted with a metal sheet covered or protection, as you can see in this image. The armour, which was actually ordered by the Luftwaffe, which I find quite interesting, only provided minimal protection, to say the least. It did improve its ability to resist small arms fire, as you can see here. This weapon could now go into a position where snipers could be firing at it, and the crew and driver could be expected to be reasonably well protected. However, against enemy aircraft strafing, particularly from the side of the rear, it was not very effective. The designation SD-KFZ 10/5 2 cm Flak 30 appeared first in October 1943. Possibly this designation was introduced to separate the vehicles armed with the 2 cm Flak 30 from the vehicles armed with the 2 cm Flak 38, which had been occurring since 1941, early-ish 1941. Production began in 1939 for deliveries to the Army and Luftwaffe, although the exact numbers will never be known as they were often not broken out separately in the production reports. At any rate, Alder built 1054 between 1939 and February 1943, although some of these were completed as SD-KFZ 10-5s beginning in 1942. MWC was awarded 2 contracts for 975 SD-KFZ 10-5s to be delivered in 43-44, but 13 of these were delivered as ordinary SD-KFZ 10s in 1944. I've assumed about 2029 may have been produced, and my gut feeling is the vast bulk of these vehicles were actually SD-KFZ 10-5s. The SD-KFZ-10-5 carried the 2cm Flak 38, whose mount was wider and lighter than that of the Flak 30, and the platform was enlarged to accommodate it from 1942 onwards. Initially, vehicles modified with the wider platform for the Flak 38 did not have a special designation, but they were given one sometime in 1943. The earliest known use is the 1st of September 1943, but the older name lingered until the 1st of December 1944, which could be one reason why a lot of my sources claim that various divisions were equipped with SD-KFZ-10-4s in September 1944, when this seemed very unlikely indeed. The Luftwaffe ordered 293 sets of armoured plate, Beheerspanzerung, for its vehicles in 1943. These plates covered the radiator, windshield and both sides of the driver's compartment and were fitted to both versions of the SD-KFZ-10, that is the 4 and the 5 armoured variety. This was a field conversion. You will also, the other thing that also occurred was that in the earlier versions of this weapon, many of the guns did not have the shield in front of the weapon. Once the armour plates were included, the shield was included. What I find interesting was the Luftwaffe who decided to implement this, but the Army certainly did like it and decided to also do its own conversion, although the numbers of these are completely unknown. Beginning in 1942, some SD-KFZ-10-5s received armoured protection in front of the radiator and the driver's compartment. This made combat against enemy ground forces easier and was actually its main effect, although I'm not quite sure why the Luftwaffe may have ordered it. This photo was made in the winter of 1943 and 1944. However, as indicated before, this didn't really provide adequate protection against enemy aircraft that decided to strafe it, but it was extremely effective against ground forces. Now, early in the war, this made a great deal of sense because the Germans had control of the air. But by late 43, this was certainly not the case. And as we can see with some of the other vehicles, the armour protection was substantially more extensive. I don't have really very detailed data here. So as far as I can work out, most of the SD-KFZ-10-4s and 10-5s were organised into flak batteries in the flak battalion of the Panzer or Panzergrenadier Division, or in 4-vehicle formations as part of the Panzer or Panzergrenadier regiments or Panzer battalions. This example here, which is based on a light division, actually in the desert, is a battalion or a company/battery size formation of this weapon, which would have been attached to the flak battalion of the Panzer division. The SD-KFZ 251/17 Schützenpanzerwagen 2 cm was an anti-aircraft vehicle armed with a 2 cm KWK-38 on a pedestal mounting with a small armoured turret to protect the gunner. Late war, it was issued as a platoon commander's vehicle to replace the SD-KFZ 251/10. As a result, I assume this was not really organised into any kind of battery-sized formation. It may have been just an ad hoc vehicle. One note, as far as I can work out, most of the 251-based anti-flak guns were generally allocated to the Panzergrenadier battalions or regiments that were equipped with SD-KFZ 251 armoured personnel carriers, which of course made sense from a maintenance point of view. The SD-KFZ 251/17 was manufactured most probably beginning in August 1944. Some sources indicate this may have been as early as August 1943, and some as late as November 1944. I'm uncertain what the correct date is. As indicated before, this vehicle, the SD-KFZ 251/17, replaced the SD-KFZ 251/10 in the armoured infantry units. The Schützenpanzerwagen Drilling MG151 was an anti-aircraft and ground support variant equipped with the triple-mounted Drilling in German, which means triple, of MG151 autocannon, early versions being the MG151/15mm cannon, which was used on a Kriegsmarine triple mount. Strong firepower, especially when organised into platoons of 6 SPWs. However, with a combined rate of fire of 2000 RPMs, it could fire off its full load of 3,000 rounds in just 90 seconds. My guess is that this is the 15mm version because the barrels are rather thin, although I must admit it's actually rather difficult to determine the difference between the two calibers. While my sources indicate 242 were built, I am uncertain how many were armed with the 15mm and how many with the 2cm. My gut feeling is there were very few 15mm versions and most of them were 2cm. The Schützenpanzerwagen Drilling MG151 2cm was the version which I think represent the majority of this vehicle. It was armed with a triple mounted 2cm gun and of course mounted on the same Kriegsmarine triple mount. It was very strong firepower, especially when organised in platoons of 6 weapons. It's interesting to note that they use 6 here, so my gut feeling is that these weapons were pretty much exclusively used in the Panzergrenadier regiments, actually attached to the Panzergrenadier companies, which were armed with SDKZ 251s. Each of them contained 6 SPAA weapons, which are of 2cm calibre, and this weapon probably fitted directly into that grouping, or into that formation, I should say. And this is my guess of a 2cm version. However, the barrels still look rather thin, so I just really don't know. I based my guess on the comments associated with this photograph. I was unable to find obviously thicker barrel versions, so perhaps it's actually hard to notice the difference between the two weapon systems. One reference indicates these weapons were organised into batteries of 6 vehicles, which would imply they were part of a Panzergrenadier formation, specifically working in conjunction with SDKZ 251 armoured personnel carrier formations. Now, this organisation came into place in September 1944, if my memory serves me correct, and the units were directly attached to the Panzergrenadier companies in the Panzer divisions. I do not think they were ever part of a flak battalion in a Panzer or Panzergrenadier division, as these formations consisted of 12 vehicles and it made little sense to put a 251 based vehicle in these formations. The SDKZ 250/4 was an anti-aircraft variant of this armoured personnel carrier armed with dual MG34 machine guns. It never reached mass production, although some were built. While well armoured, machine guns, especially 7.92mm, were not very effective against aircraft later in the war. Some sources show this vehicle being produced in March 1944, but it was most likely this was produced in the early war period, 1942 at the latest. This photo shows a SDKZ 250/4 in what appears to be Russia, which is dated August-September 1942. This makes more sense than the 1944 date from my other source, as in 1942 machine guns may have had some effect against aircraft, especially Russian observation aircraft. The 8.8cm flak 18 AUSRÜSTUng 12-ton SDKZ-8, also known as the Bunkerflak or Buffler, was a German Wehrmacht half-track self-propelled gun developed before World War II and used in the first half of the war. It was used during the invasion of Poland, but is best known for its use during the Battle of France, where it was the only German self-propelled gun capable of destroying the heavier Allied tanks such as the French Char B1 and the British Matilda II. Remaining vehicles were used on the Eastern Front. The last Bunkerflak was destroyed in 1943. All 10 vehicles converted or manufactured were assigned to the 1st Company of the Anti-Tank Battalion, Panzerjägerabteilung 8, of which participated in the invasion of Poland in 1939 and the Battle of France in 1940, and Operation Barbarossa in 1941. The company was redesignated as Panzerjäger Company, Anti-Tank Company 601 in January 1942, and then as the 3rd Company of Anti-Tank Battalion 559 the following April. It was reported that the last 3 vehicles had been lost by March 1943. 8.8cm flak 18 anti-aircraft guns were mounted on 15 SDKZ-9s in 1940 as the 8.8cm flak 18 AUSRÜSTUng 18-ton SDKZ-9 for anti-tank duties. I assume it was also used for anti-aircraft duties. The crew and engine compartment were lightly armoured, but completely armoured, which limited the gun's ability to fire directly ahead. A platform with drop-down sides was fitted for the gun. Outriggers were necessary to brace the weapon inside to support the weight of the gun crew. The vehicle weighed 25 tonnes and was extremely large. Not actually sure if this was an actual anti-aircraft SP weapon, but anyway, in theory, it could be used in this way. This is the photo which makes me think this was actually a SPAA weapon as well as being a tank destroyer weapon. The weapon could actually elevate sufficiently high to take out aircraft. The one source that I had claimed that these vehicles were produced as prototypes in 1943. The Germans from the very beginning of the war always believed that their panzer forces should contain all-tracked supporting vehicles. Now, early in the war, the half-track actually had a cross-country capability that was reasonably acceptable when compared with, let's say, the Panzerkampfwagen 4. However, once the Germans came out with the Panther tank, the poor old half-track simply could not keep up, and as a result, track vehicles began to become more important. However, early in the war, the Germans did look at some fully tracked anti-aircraft mounts, as we'll see in this video. The 2cm Flak 38 Aufs Panzer I, AUSRÜSTUng A, commonly known as the Flak Panzer I, was a rare self-propelled anti-aircraft gun conversion of the Panzer I, where a 2cm flak was placed on an obsolete Panzer I chassis. The Flak Panzer I was developed during the Battle of France when it was recognised that the motorised flak was insufficiently armoured. The Germans, Heers Waffenamt, decided to combine light anti-aircraft guns with tank chassis. The chassis of the Panzer I was used for these conversions simply because it was available. The conversion was done by Stuyven. Only one unit, motorised Flak Battalion 614, was equipped with the Flak Panzer I. The unit was assembled in 1941 and in the same year was stationed in Romania. From there they moved into the southern part of the Eastern Front. In service, the vehicles were of limited use against aircraft, but were mostly used against ground targets because the gun could only fire straight forward, being in a relatively fixed mount. For proper anti-aircraft fire, a traversable gun mount was preferable, but space was far too limited on the Panzer I chassis for such a mount. Due to the insufficient protection of the crew in this sort of deployment, they suffered high losses. The whole battalion was wiped out in 1943 during the Battle of Stalingrad, even though most of the vehicles had probably been abandoned or destroyed already. As indicated, the motorised Flak Battalion 614 was equipped with Flak Panzer Is. I am assuming 2 batteries/companies of 12 vehicles each, as well as other Flak companies/batteries. The Flak Panzer 38T, officially named Flak Panzer 38T Aufs Zesfallerfetter 38T Aufs M, or SDKZ 140, was a German self-propelled anti-aircraft gun using the obsolete Panzer 38T chassis and a 2cm flak gun. The Flak Panzer 38T was intended to be issued to the anti-aircraft platoon of each tank battalion, Panzerabteilung, in the Panzer Division. Most of the Flak Panzer 38s were issued to Panzer divisions on the Western Front, the remainder served on the Eastern Front. An example user being the 12th SS Panzer Division. Should be noted that these weapons were also probably allocated to the anti-aircraft platoon of the Panzer Regiment HQ. The Flak-Feeling 2cm Flak aus Fahrgestell Panzerkampfwagen 4, nicknamed Mobilwagen or moving van because of its boxy shape, was a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun built from the chassis of a Panzer IV tank and mounting the quad 2cm flak. The prototype displayed to Hitler on December 7, 1943, used the 2cm Flak-Feeling 38, which was deemed too weak for the later aircraft, which was constantly being improved to fly higher and faster. Only a single prototype with this gun was produced before the design was rejected, although some sources indicate 10 may have been built or possibly converted, and I tend to believe the latter source more than the former. This weapon was supposed to have never entered service, but there seems to be a lot of pictures of it. I suspect 10 were built and may have been eventually issued to a division for test purposes, if nothing else. This is only a guess, but if accurate, I have no idea which front it was being tested on. It seems reasonable to test it in the east, but I lack any conclusive info on this point, and this picture seems to indicate that it's probably France somewhere. Also, if the quad 2cm was not effective, which is the reason why they decided not to proceed with this, why was this weapon used on its successor? I suspect a lot of guesswork is confusing the real picture here. There may have been another reason why it was decided to arm this with the 3.7cm flak gun. The 3.7cm flak Fahrgestell Panzerkraftwagen 4, or SDKZ 161/3, nicknamed Mobilwagen, or moving van because of its boxy shape, was a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun built from the chassis of the Panzer IV and mounting a 3.7cm flak gun. 240 Mobilwagens were built, and the first production models were put into service on the Western Front in April 1944, which I find rather interesting because the first organisational chart which shows these weapons dated in September, so I suspect that a lot of the organisation charts, as we'll see later in this video, actually reflected the reality in the field rather than some new idea moving forward. Although the Mobilwagen was intended as a stopgate, it served the anti-aircraft platoons of the Panzer divisions on the Western Front extensively. Only 240 were produced, and it was eventually succeeded by the first true flak panzers, Wirbelwind and Ostend, both of which provided the crew with improved armour protection and full rotation when firing at either ground or air targets. The Flakpanzer IV Wirbelwind, or Whirlwind in English, was a German self-propelled anti-aircraft gun based on the Panzer IV tank. It was developed in 1944 as a successor to the earlier Mobilwagen self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. The 2cm version was a conversion, although the turrets were manufactured for this vehicle, so this must have been assembled in some formal production capacity or facility. During the early summer of 1944, SS Hauptsturmführer Karl Wilhelm Krauss, with the 12th SS Panzer Division, came up with the concept of the Flakpanzer IV Whirlwind. The Panzer IV turret was removed and replaced with an open-topped, 9-sided turret that housed a 2cm Flak-Feeling 38, which was a quadruple amount of 2cm cannon. Between 87 and 105 Whirlwinds were converted from repaired Panzer IV chassis, but due to discrepancy between the recorded production numbers at Ostbauwerk, the Wehrmacht service records, the actual number may never be known. The Flakpanzer IV Osten, East Wind in English, was a German self-propelled anti-aircraft gun based on the Panzer IV tank. It was developed in 1944 as a successor to the earlier Wirbelwind. The Osten main improvement over the Wirbelwind was the Flak 43's increased range and stopping power over the 2cm Flak Feeling 38s and slightly better armour on its turret, it had a lower rate of fire. Although an order of 100 vehicles were placed in August 1944, only 44 vehicles were completed, 37 converted from existing Panzer IVs and 7 new production vehicles from December 1944 to March 1945, all work being carried by the Ostbauwerk in Sagen, Silesia. The Zestura 45 was a more powerful version of the Wirbelwind Flakpanzer, designed to compensate for the relative low power of the quadruple 2cm guns used in the earlier vehicle. The Zestura 45 was to be armed with the quadruple 3cm Flak Feeling 103/38 guns. A single prototype was built in December 1944, combining the new guns with the chassis of a Mobilwagen. It was then planned to fit the bigger guns into a Whirlwind turret, but this work may never have been carried out. The Zestura 45 would probably have been an effective anti-aircraft weapon if it had been developed earlier, but by the end of 1944, the Ostbau company was being pushed west by the advancing Russians, and like the Ostend II, nothing came of the project. The Kugelblitz used the 30mm Mk103 cannon in a Zwillingsflak twin flak 103/38 arrangement. The Mk103 had also been fitted in a single mount to such planes as the Henschel HS129 in a vertical gun pod and to the twin-engine Dornier DO335. The rate of fire of the twin 30mm gun was 450 rounds a minute per gun. The Kugelblitz combined the chassis and basic superstructure of the Panzer IV tank with a newly designed oscillating turret. The turret was fully enclosed with overhead protection and 360 traverse. Mass production was planned but never happened due to disruption by Allied bombing efforts. The Kugelblitz was not yet out of development when the war ended. Only 5 prototypes were built. It's unclear what happened to the few Kugelblitz which were built. Some sources say they ended up being used in the Battle of Berlin. One was buried in a fight somewhere else, and it was actually excavated in 1999. To the best of my knowledge, all the Flakpanzers, except the first, was allocated to the Panzer battalions of the Panzer divisions. Some sources indicated this could have been extended to the Panzer regiments as well, but this could have been an ad hoc situation rather than the official structure. The formations consisted of 3 vehicles supporting each Panzer battalion headquarters. I now decided to go through the various TOE information I have to see if I could identify where the SPAA guns were actually allocated and the rough dates that they were allocated. I have found sources which indicate some, if not all, of the Panzergrenadier divisions possessed a 12-weapon AA company or battery in the AA battalion and another 12-vehicle formation in each Panzergrenadier regiment by August 1943. By 1944, the AA company or battery in the Panzergrenadier regiment may have disappeared, or perhaps had been distributed to the Panzergrenadier battalions in 4-vehicle formations. My sources indicate these may have been towed weapons, but may have also been the self-propelled weapons. This is something I cannot confirm because I lack the source material. All my sources only mention 2cm flak weapons, but I have to assume these could have been replaced with 3.7cm flak when those weapons were available, and this would have occurred almost certainly later in the war. It's highly likely these formations were present in 1942, using the early Maltier-based weapons and the SD-KFZ-4, or 10/4. From 1943 to 1945, I suspect the lighter weapons were deployed in these formations, probably the SD-KFZ 10/4 and SD-KFZ 10/5, unarmoured and armoured variety, respectively. In February 1941, the Light Division in Africa is supposed to have had a full SPAA battalion attached to it, consisting of SD-KFZ 10/4s, which would make it the largest formation of this weapon type anywhere that I could find in any TONEs. The August 1943 Panzer Division structure included a 12-vehicle SPAA formation in the Panzergrenadier Regiment, but not the motorised regiment, only the Panzergrenadier Regiment, which contained the SD-KFZ 251s, and a second 12-vehicle SPAA formation in the Anti-Aircraft Battalion. In 1944, my sources indicate that the vehicles used were SD-KFZ 10/5s. I find it strange the Panzer Regiment or Panzer Battalion had no SPAAs, instead being equipped with towed 3.7cm AA guns. I have no proof, but I suspect these may have also been self-propelled, and possibly the sources I used were not correct. The second point is the vehicles. I suspect in 1943 many of the divisions were equipped with SD-KFZ 7/1s rather than SD-KFZ 10/5s, although by mid-44 perhaps this was no longer the case. In September 1944, or the September 44 Panzer Division structure, the usage of these weapons increased, with the Panzer battalions and Panzer regiments being equipped with 3-vehicle formations made up of Flakpanzers. Now, I'm absolutely certain that these 3-vehicle formations existed prior to September 1944 because the first Flakpanzers were actually pumped out fairly early in 1944. So where did they go? The Panzergrenadier companies, but not the motorised companies, received organic 6-vehicle formations of SPAA vehicles. These were probably using the SD-KFZ 251 mounts. The AA battalion retained its 12-vehicle formation, most likely SD-KFZ 10/5s. I now come to a close of my video on German SPAA weapons. I have no doubt I shall be updating this video in the future as I obtain a new source material. I've posted some of the source material I've used in the URL shown in this image. Denken Sie daran, immer für Hill Heimatland zu kämpfen.